Turn A Gundam is a mobile suit that, at first glance, is as unorthodox as its design. Be mindful that you don't judge this book by its cover, as first impressions aren't everything. With the ability to play within close to long-medium range, 1v1 almost any suit in the game, buffer incoming damage or patch yourself up, and the potential to team wipe, Turn A will win you over in no time. Flexibility and function combine to form a mobile suit that's much stronger than it looks. Together, we'll take a look at its unique skill set and see just what kind of strategies we can unearth from the mountain cycle. Turn A Gundam's main weapon is the beam rifle. This weapon functions as a semi-automatic rifle that performs well at medium to shorter long ranges. Holding down your primary fire button will cause the shots to fire in quick succession. Don't be fooled. This weapon's rate of fire and initial pinpoint accuracy make it a real monster when hip-firing in short-range engagements, provided you can maintain a lock on your target. The hip-fire for this weapon is unique, in that it acts as a hit-scan weapon whilst hip-firing, meaning so long as your aiming reticle is on target, you'll always land your shot, and the projectile you fire will not have travel time. As mentioned before, sustained fire will heavily increase bullet spread, turning the pinpoint accuracy into something more akin to the RX-78 Gundam's hip-fire. As such, this is something that's way better suited for closer range skirmishes. For Turn A's secondary fire, the suit will raise the rifle upward, aim down sight, and begin charging up your next shot. You can still move while charging the beam rifle, and even boost step, normal boost, and boost jump. Keep this point in mind as it changes everything. We'll hit that point later in the mobility section, however. The HUD next to your aiming reticle displays a segmented charging gauge that'll let you know just how much of a percentage of charge you're holding. The longer you charge the beam rifle, the more damage you will deal, with a fully charged shot gaining a piercing property to the projectile. There is one downside to this, however. Charging your shot will decrease the speed of the projectile, transforming it into something that is no longer hit scan. This means you'll have to lead your shots and get used to the travel speed of your beam. On top of this, a charged shot will consume 2 rounds instead of 1. This special aspect of the rifle does take some getting used to, as transitioning from a hit scan to projectile means you need to be able to handle swapping, leading your shots, or keeping your sights trained directly on your target. Holding down the fire button after releasing a charged shot will see you fire more shots out in quick succession. This acts as a sort of 1-2 punch and can deal surprisingly high amount of damage, especially on unassuming opponents. When you throw out the 1-2 punch, lower HP suits will take a real beating. One last thing to note is that the ADS visuals from holding right click can kind of help as a placebo effect to help you focus on your aim more, as you've most likely been trained to do so from other FPS games. But I think the biggest, most important tip that I can give about the secondary fire is not to get greedy. Do not get greedy. When you use your charge shots, you kind of need to learn when to let go. That's literally. We'll go in depth about that and the 1-2 punch later and tips and tricks, but just know that holding on to a charge to release max damage is not worth the respawn time if you find yourself dying because you don't want to release a charge shot. Experience, map awareness, and game sense during engagements against the enemy team will truly help you understand when you should use which shot type. If enemies are lined up, grouped up, or potentially funneling through one choke point or path, heavy use of your charge shot will see Turn A slinging out tons of damage in a short amount of time. Another way to view this firing mode is to think of it as a delayed burst fire. Turn A's first ability is the Nanoskin armor. This simple and easy to use skill sees the Turn A recover health over time upon activation. While it would seem that this is only useful when low on health, in practice you can actually utilize this skill as a damage buffer before peeking sightlines, or engaging in combat with units at nearly any range. This comes with a large caveat, however. Using the ability in this way is a big commitment, as the cooldown on this ability is very long. One of the longer cooldowns in the entire game, in fact. So I recommend practicing your skills first, before you start relying on it as a damage mitigation tool. And it isn't always the right call in every fight, as it's really risky, and Having this ability at the ready after a sloppy fight might be the difference between you making it to the next larger skirmish, or not. Or, just waiting on that long respawn timer. The second ability that Turn A boasts is the Unyielding Overhead Throw. This ability has the biggest impact on Turn A's playstyle compared to every other ability we will discuss today. Overhead Throw has a large number of uses, and it can act as an engagement tool, a disengage, a counter, an on-demand stun, and a tool to fling your opponents off the map into death pits, and even as a defensive cooldown in some rare cases. Extremely rare cases, mind you. Upon use, Turn A will lunge forward and heavily damage and stun any opponent it comes into contact with. Then, it'll immediately perform a backwards judo throw in the direction opposite of where you're aiming. Your opponent will remain stunned through the entire duration of the grab and throw, and will also remain stunned and vulnerable on the ground for a second or two. Another thing to note is that enemies that have their shields up when you hit them with this ability will have them stripped. During the duration of this move, Turn A will glow green and have heavy damage reduction as well as immunity to CC, that's crowd control for the newbies out there. This ability single-handedly gives you the opportunity to 1v1 nearly any suit that's foolish enough to approach you. You can use the overhead throw to counter melee units who rush you, turn the tides against suits with more HP than you or shields, or even save yourself from powerful attacks such as an enemy G maneuver if timed correctly. Upon landing the judo throw, a fully charged shot followed by a few headshots in rapid succession is almost enough to down nearly any suit in the game. Thanks to the insane duration of the stun, unless your opponent has armor granted to them by another suit's abilities, you'll seldom find yourself failing to kill whatever it is you're shooting at. Except Sazabi, sometimes he just sort of lives, but I assume that has to do with the tick rate. The biggest thing to watch out for when using overhead throw is the fact that the move itself has a delay in the actual stun activation, as well as ending lag if you miss your grab. During said ending lag, you're essentially a sitting duck. It may only last a moment, but it's long enough to easily be taken out by a group that's focusing its fire on you, even with the damage reduction in mind. Also, the only way to cancel out of overhead throw is to use your G maneuver. Since it has a long animation, keep this in mind, as it could save you in a sticky situation if you can manage to fly away to safety.
そう、この世界に終わりをもたらす光。
Turn A's G maneuver is the dreaded Moonlight Butterfly. Upon use, Turn A takes to the sky and will rain down deadly terrain-piercing particles in a trail behind itself that deal heavy damage to anyone hit by it. This move has the potential to turn the tide of a fight by potentially killing an entire team if they're grouped up in the wrong place at the wrong time. While it may seem straightforward, there's actually 3 major factors to keep in mind with this G maneuver. First, the flight controls take some time to get used to thanks to the delay in your turning as you fly around. Because of this, turns have to be made preemptively, and you have to be really good at movement prediction. Secondly, changing direction mid-flight will actually cause you to lose a lot of speed, and a direct 180 will drastically cut your speed if you're hugging a wall in the direction that you're turning. While these may seem like downsides, with enough outside-of-the-box thinking, we can actually use these 2 properties to our advantage. While flying over enemies, they'll take damage just after you've flown past them, making this move somewhat hard to aim and reliably use, but utilizing the steering properties, you can fishtail your Moonlight Butterfly trail to try and catch someone off when you just barely miss the kill on the first pass. Lastly, an odd property I've tested extensively at time of recording, there seems to be one major hidden quirk about how the move's damage works. For whatever reason, it would seem that the higher up you fly, the more damage your Moonlight Butterfly will actually deal to any given target. I've tested this in the weeks leading up to the guide's production, and for the life of me, I can't really give you a true, honest explanation as to why, but it's consistently happening. We're going to delve more into this during the tips and tricks section later, so for now, know that this move, when mastered, can cause major damage. Death comes on beautiful wings. With all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about movement. Turn A Gundam's boost gauge is divided into 2 steps. This mobile suit boasts 320 units over 6 seconds for its basic movement speed. Your standard boost distance and speed is going to be 860 units over the entire duration of your boost gauge across 10 seconds. Turn A's boost steps go roughly 75 units per boost. And this mobile suit's boost jump distance is 110 units per boost jump. Turn A sees reduced movement speed while charging its beam rifle. During this state, your move speed is roughly 250 units over 6 seconds. While consuming a full boost gauge will see you moving 820 units over 10 seconds. Boost jump distance and speed while charging is the exact same as non-charging. Let's put everything together. When it comes to playing Turn A, you have a few options, but generally, my rule of thumb is you always want to be harassing the enemy or dealing out some kind of damage. You don't exactly want to do this head-on, because the more attention you draw to yourself, the more people are going to shoot at you, obviously. And as we talked about before, you do have a defensive cooldown in emergency with Judo Toss if you really want to. You could also mitigate that damage by utilizing your heal, but both of those cooldowns are pretty darn long, almost half a minute each. So I find it important to play with your team, but slightly off to the side, not necessarily entirely flanking, but if the enemy team is hyper-focused on what your team is doing, and you can get up to a nice vantage point, that's when you can really do a lot of damage, especially if enemies are grouped up. Throwing out charge shots on enemies that try to group up, or death ball as they call it, is going to be a really great way at shutting that down. Unattentive teams are going to be like your favorite thing to come across, because that's what you eat for breakfast. I think another really important thing to note is that you really should be saving your overhead throw for a guaranteed kill. You can use it to save yourself, yes, but if you get the throw and you're low HP, and it's another suit that can just aim in your general direction and shoot you and take you out in one tick of damage, it's not really worth it unless you fling them off the side of the map or whatever. I would say that you do have massive flanking potential, like I mentioned, but your best strength is sticking with your team, because if there's a mobile suit on the enemy team that's going to try and jump into the middle of your team and cause some damage, like a Barbatos for example, if you are with your team and you have throw up, you shut them down 100%. I'm not going to say hard counter. I've had a lot of them survive through that before. That being said, it's great utility and you're a major asset if you can shut stuff like that down. That's not even mentioning Melee Zaku's G maneuver. I've seen some salt, and I'll chat for that. I think ultimately the most important thing to note is that a lot of people try and play Turn A like a marksman, but as we went over with the primary and secondary functions of its rifle, you can play up close to it. And if your aim is good enough, you can shut people down really hard. So don't lock yourself into a single playstyle, because you have a lot of these tools at your disposal to make sure that you're versatile. And then the same goes for your ult. You can use it for mobility. I really don't recommend doing that. You really want to get as much damage as you can, but once you practice and you understand how the damage works, you can completely turn the tide of games. And I think that's probably where your strength lies. It's a very unassuming mobile suit, at least to people who don't take the time to learn it. But if you know what you can do, you can just roll everybody over. It's almost insane. It's very similar to RX-78 in that regard. There's been a bit of debate online about the effectiveness of Turn A's primary weapon. It boils down to whether or not spamming Hipfire or spamming fully charged shots is better and which does more damage overall. I'm going to toss my opinion into the mix. I don't think there is one true better option. In my opinion, the real strength of Turn A's primary weapon is having the ability to choose between two completely different methods of damage and fire types: burst and pierce damage or sustain accurate damage. Like I said before, I think the best thing for Turn A to do is to always be laying down fire on the enemy team. Spamming Hipfire is a great option when enemies are up close and you've got good tracking skills, especially when it comes to aiming for the head. However, the charge shot isn't just useful for doing damage to grouped up enemies with the pierce shot. The 1-2 punch I mentioned earlier goes as follows. You unleash a fully charged shot and continue to aim down sight and just hold the primary fire button. While you have to lead your shots using this technique, it does very reliable burst damage. This is also how you should be counter-sniping other long-range units. If you can get the drop on a sniper or a long-range unit that isn't looking at you, you just have to land 2 headshots after your initial burst. You'll completely decimate their health bar, if not outright kill them. I've seen many Turn A players mistakenly just try to spam charge shots at full charge to deal with snipers at range. And while it sounds like a good idea on paper, by the time your second charge shot is ready, they can double back to a health pack or simply just 2-tap you in the head if you aren't willing to let go of your charge early. Remember when I said not to get greedy when talking about your charge shots? Perfect example right there. If you need to drop what you're doing to retreat and find cover or a health pack, unleash your charge shot as soon as possible. The respawn timer takes you out of combat and position for far longer than retreating to find cover or a health pack ever would. Being the character that has a near guaranteed kill combo means nothing to your team if you're willing to get greedy and not keep laying down the hurt. Try and stay alive. We already went over the 2 different ways to use Nanoskin, but let's talk about how we can further increase survivability when we combo it with Overhead Throw. Overhead Throw has a great amount of damage reduction, so if we use Nanoskin before or during Overhead Throw, we can further mitigate incoming damage. This goes without saying, but this is a very risky, and depending on the situation, a borderline wasteful combo. There are 2 of the longest cooldowns in the game that you just used, and you're going to be left with your pants down without them. You should only use it if you're really desperate, or you know for certain that you can come out on top. You'll never know what your limits are if you aren't willing to experiment and push yourself, so don't be afraid to give this a shot if you find yourself caught in a hectic firefight. Most enemies in my games never really seem to focus on killing a Turn A first if there was a bulkier suit, or a suit some consider OP or a bigger threat. But if you're stuck in the middle of a team fight, and you have 2 people shooting you, pop both and try your best to come out on top. It's improbable, but not impossible. That is, until you hone your skill through enough practice. So another tip that I wanted to share is the fact that Moonlight Butterfly doesn't just act as one of the strongest offensive G maneuvers in the game, but it also acts as a good mobility, traversal, and even escape option if you're desperate enough and absolutely need to live on. The speed that you fly at with Turn A is quite fast, and the vertical mobility of a temporary flight mode means that you can easily reposition to great vantage points by the time your ability wears off. So long as enemies have shoddy aim, you can even just use it to push their groups at a lower altitude, even though this comes at the cost of lower damage from a lower altitude. Similarly, as you leave a trail of death wherever you fly, it can be used as a good escape tool when you factor in your speed, mobility, and damage trail you leave in your wake. This is extremely unideal, but there have been a few times where trading my G maneuver cooldown to survive for the next skirmish paid off more than a failed attempt at a big play with it did. Another big tip comes in the form of pressure. This move, when viewed from someone who knows just how much damage it deals, can cause a great amount of map pressure while active. Many players who know will make an attempt to reach places that Turn A can't fly over to escape the insane damage, and as such, you can actually use this to your advantage. Using Moonlight Butterfly when it's ready and not holding it for a big flay can actually disrupt the enemy team almost as much as a Marasai or Barbatos getting choice picks on the enemy team, if you manage to get at least 2 players with it. Even just dealing heavy damage will create enough of a shift in strength that your team can push and easily play cleanup crew. Lastly, on the other side of this coin, players who have no idea how strong this move is can just get utterly decimated by it. They might not understand the intricacies of how its damage works and will just assume that it'll do light tick damage. This is the point where they're going to learn today. As mentioned before, I have a minor theory as to why Turn A's G maneuver does more damage from higher altitudes. The particles that form the actual damaging projectile travel through terrain, but I'm fairly certain they travel down a unit's hitbox, creating multiple hits or ticks of damage per particle. This racks up damage at an insane degree, and flying low or almost slightly above a unit appears to have the particles spawn a few units below Turn A. Like, we're talking probably about 3 or 4 feet below the unit. This would mean that, if my theory is correct, maximum damage is achieved from getting the move to travel from head to toe of a unit, rather than simply showering the unit with lower altitude particles from the start of this move from the waist down. My last and favorite trick is utilizing a wall or a corner to plant yourself in place. Using this, you can plant yourself on the defusal point on a destruction map and form a large kill zone as a last-ditch effort at defending your arm. Yes, you can easily get shot down while doing this, but players tend to focus more on the fact that you're creating a kill zone and would rather not risk getting inside of it. Let's move on to my final thoughts. Many players look at units like Barbatos, Exia, and Marasai as examples of units that are easier to play due to the fact that they have clearly defined or easy to pick up combos. And I've noticed that there seems to be a trend in modern hero shooters and character-based games that combos are preferred and easier than that of characters with a skill set or a kit like Turn A. And while this suit may seem as unorthodox as its visual design, really when you boil it down, considering everything we've talked about, Turn A really has a handful of abilities that are akin to the RX-78 Gundams, part of the reason why I did this guide next. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife with many tools suitable for different situations and things, all wrapped up into one solid package. In my opinion, this best describes Turn A, as many people will tell you, just play it as a mid-range marksman only, or that you're only useful thanks to your overhead stun, or, you know, maybe you're only useful if you get a team wipe. But I think with a great showing of close and mid-range tools, I can't help but think that the suit has been misinterpreted at large by other content creators and players. The suit is awesome, and it can help shut down some of the more annoying suits in the game, while being able to hold its own at close and long ranges. A lot will look at the abilities when they hit F1 and they might think, oh, this is wonky, none of this fits together, and what they really mean to say is, these abilities do not seemingly artificially synergize for a restricted playstyle. But they just don't realize that yet. And once you realize that this is a suit that rewards game knowledge and players who are overall skilled at fundamentals, you'll come to see that Turn A for what it is. A beautiful powerhouse and an asset to any team. I hope this guide inspires you to give this mobile shoot a shot, and hopefully the anime too, it's one of the best. And if you have anything else to add into the discussion, any tips or tricks of your own, anything I might have missed or failed to go over, leave them down below in the comments. I'm always looking to improve and make these videos as attentive as possible.
everyone, so that we may forge our own path and establish a government for the refugees, I ask you, lend me your great strength for just a little longer. When we've succeeded, I will then be able to join my father, Sion.